Welcome. This screencast is going to introduce the general interface of Stata and some of its basic capabilities. I'm going to focus on Stata 13 for the Mac because that's what I use, but it should be relevant to Stata on other platforms. When you open up Stata, you'll get something that looks like this, where you have several windows where different information is going to be displayed. I'm going to focus on the results in the command section first and then introduce these other windows on the left and right once we get there. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to open a data set. And I'm going to do that by typing in a command here in the command window. Stata comes built in with a number of data sets that are built into the Stata. And one of them is the auto data set. So we're going to type in the word sysuse. What that means is system. It's a system data set, so we're going to sysuse the auto data set. When we hit enter, we're going to see that some information was displayed in the results section. This is just the result of whatever our command was. And so since we asked for it to load the auto data set, it tells you that it's the 1978 automobile data. Okay, a couple things to notice immediately is that over on the left, the variables pane is now filled with information. And this is going to give you just a quick overview of what each of the variables are in this data set, this auto data set. So we have variable make and variable price and their variable MPG, which stands for miles per gallon. So it gives you the variable name. It also gives you the label of those variables. So make is the make and model, price is the price, MPG is mileage per gallon, and so on. So it gives you quick information. You also see that over on the right here, the command we typed, which was sysuse auto, gets displayed up here. And this panel over here is called the review panel, and it's going to echo or re-display each of the commands that we type while we're using Stata. It's pretty handy because it lets you see what you've done, and you can also click on it and it'll reproduce the command down here in the command window. So sometimes, especially if you type a long command, it's useful because you're able to just quickly call up that command again. Down here we have the properties window, and it's got some information. So it tells you a bit about the data set. It tells you what the file name of the data set is, what the label of that data set is, and so on. It provides other notes, and we can get into those details another time. You can also if you click on one of the variables, it'll provide information about that variable. Give you the name, the make, the model, or excuse me, the name, the label, which is make and model. It'll give you the type. In this case, this says it's a string variable, which means it's made up of words or letters. And with price, you'll see that the name's price, the label's price, but this is an integer, miles per gallon, also an integer. So that gives you just a quick overview of what the data set contains. All right, so let's say now we want some information about this data set. If we want to just see what the data set is quickly in the results window, we can use the command describe. So we're going to type the word describe and hit enter. And it's going to provide where the data is, so where it's stored. So like I said, this is a built-in data set, so it's in this system file here. It's got 74 observations, 12 variables, and that sort of thing. Okay, and then it also gives you a quick summary of the data variables and their labels, similar to what we see over in the variables section. Okay, we can also get information on a specific variable. So let's say we want the mean and the standard deviation of miles per gallon. To do that, we're going to say summarize, and then we'll type MPG, which is our variable name. Summarize MPG. We get the number of observations, mean, standard deviation, min, and max. Okay. We could also type summarize price, and you get that information for price. We can also type summarize MPG and price, and it'll just quickly give us the summary information for each of those variables. Okay, so we use the command describe to look at our data set, and that gives us some information sort of in a summary way of what's going on in our data set. We've also seen that over here on the left we get the names of all the variables in our data set, and down here in the properties we can get information about each of those variables in our data set, but sometimes it's nice to be able to visualize the data set, to be able to see it like you would in Microsoft Excel or other stats programs like SPSS. And nicely, Stata has a data editor and for doing this, or a data browser. Okay, so if you click on Data Editor, it'll open up a window that looks like this, and you'll see that it looks like a kind of a standard spreadsheet with the variable names across the top and the rows representing observations for each of those variable names. And again, you get information about those variables here on the right in the variable pane and the properties pane. Couple things to notice. One is that the variable make in this case is color coded as orange or red. And what that means is that with this red variable, that's telling you that it's a string variable. In other words, that they're using words instead of numbers to represent information. These other ones are black because they're numbers. And you can do lots of things here. Edit. If you're in the edit mode, you can actually change information in here like you could in any other spreadsheet like Microsoft Excel. If you want to just browse so that you don't change anything, you just click on the browse button, and that's your data browser. So this, I usually keep this window open. You can have it open and put it on another screen or behind Stata so that I am able to just visualize the data. I find it very useful to be able to see it. The next thing I want to show you is the graph editor and the graph window. Stata has extensive graphical capabilities, and pretty much any graph you can think of you can make in Stata. So let's start with a simple histogram so we can see what happens. So in order to do that, we're going to type the command histogram, and then we need a variable for it. So let's do the histogram of miles per gallon. So we do histogram MPG. If we hit enter, up comes the graph. A nice graph, if I do say so myself. But it's also maybe just the default colors, and maybe we want something that looks a little bit different. So we could manipulate the graph via the commands and change the color and all those sorts of things, and I would suggest that you learn how to do that. But often in just toying around with things, it's useful to use this graph editor. So if you click on graph editor, you're going to see that it allows you to manipulate the graph manually with your mouse. So for example, looking at the bins, they're currently a khaki color, again, which is the default Stata uses. So if we want to change that, we're just going to double click on the bins, and we're going to get this thing called bar properties, and you can change all kinds of stuff about the bar properties. So let's say we just want to change the color, and we're going to change it to maroon. Okay, so we click on maroon, click OK. You're going to see that it changes the colors of the bins. Okay, you can also change the axes. So if you want to change this, right now it's this, it says mileage MPG, which is the label of the variable. So if we want it to look a little bit differently, we could just change this to say miles per gallon, and it'll add that there. Okay, so you can manipulate the graphs right here. When you're done, you just close it up. You say save, and you're able to save the graph wherever you like. All right, one of the last things I want to show you is the graph viewer and the graph editor. Stata has extensive graphical capabilities, and pretty much any graph you can think of you can make in Stata. So let's start with a simple one, a histogram. So to do that, we're going to type the command histogram, and then it needs a variable. So let's do the histogram of miles per gallon for these cars. So if we type histogram MPG and hit enter, we're going to get the graph window, which is going to display this graph, which is not a bad looking graph. Stata has pretty good defaults, but sometimes you want a different color, you want to change the axis labels and those sorts of things. Now you can do that with commands, and I recommend that you learn how to do that because it makes it much easier to manipulate commands over time. But sometimes it's useful or nice to be able to just manually click on some things, make some changes, and see how it looks. So let's say we want to change the color of these bins. So in order to do that, we're going to click on Graph Editor. And you're going to see as we do that, we get additional information as well as an interface for manipulating the graph manually. So if we want to change the color of these bins, we're going to double click on them. and up comes this thing called bar properties. You can see that one of the options is the color. So it defaults to khaki. So let's change this, and we're going to change it to cranberry. Okay, we get cranberry, we say okay. Stata will do its thing and change the color to cranberry. And you could change it to another color if you'd like. You can also manipulate the axis labels. So if we double click on mileage per gallon, which is our x-axis down here, we can change the text. So let's just do miles per gallon. Okay, we can increase or decrease the size of the font. So let's make it large, and we'll make it green, which I don't recommend, but was just showing you how this works. So we say okay, miles per gallon, green. Okay, and then if you want to save it, you can click save. I'm just going to click out of this. It's going to say it's been changed but not saving, so I'm not going to save it. So that's the graph editor. Again, you can do lots of things using that to manipulate your graphs and make them look better.